Here we come to one of the annoyances of Bowden extruders, is leaving the filament on. I usually end up with broken filament due to the stress, but of course now I've got that much filament that's being wasted rather than just the little short amount going in. But we're going to attempt to set up for a dual color benchy here and see what we get. So stick with us. Now, continuing here, we're already running our heater and our temperature curve's looking pretty good. So we should be able to back the extruder out. Problem is we need, well, so there we are. We probably broke down inside now. Yep. So, not sure what the chances are that we can actually push the filament down through. So here we are after trying to back it out. We got that much of the filament out. It's of course broken in the tube. So apparently, unless I remove the filament every time I run this, I'm going to have this problem. Now the question is, are we tight enough? I think you can see the broken filament right there. So if I were to drive this in, what is the chance that it will extrude without binding up? Probably pretty slim. Alright, so without having a better guide inside this Bowden feed, I have no choice but to sit here and fight with it, trying to get the filament to go straight through. And of course the filament is always curved slightly. So getting it to go into the other side is a very fun challenge. Right, so I have not tried using a dual color extruder before, but the evidence that I am seeing with this design is that the two filaments are actually interfering with each other. Instead of them going into the hot end, it seems like if I don't retract one filament considerably, the other filament can't push in. So the net result is coming out that I don't see how you can do blended colors at all with this particular extruder, but I'm not even sure how it's going to do a multicolor print. So we're going to give it a shot, but I am not overly optimistic at the moment. Okay, so now we are going to do our two-color benchy. And so what we need to do is load both of these parts. And so as you see, they are two separate parts, and what we want is we want the gunwale on the hull. So if we drag that on, that merges it, and then we choose which color we want for each. So we're just going to do two for the gunwale, which should be our black, and one should still be our orange. And so now we come in and we slice, and what you will see when we slice, probably should have told it to center this. I think it may have recentered automatically. You'll notice now that this offset, this little pad that it created, is now its place for doing its color changes. So the idea here is this is your waste location as it changes colors. So presumably this will work. We've already got everything heated up for the most part, so let's give it a shot. Let me get the trash off the bed here real quick. And hopefully our home still works properly. right. And as I recall, it took a little while last time before it decides to actually start printing something. I see our fan is not running, which I don't think it's supposed to be for this layer. There we go. And location-wise, we are still roughly the same place we were before. So here we are, printing the first layer of our raft in an orange and black color, since the black is still there. What I don't like is the sound of the feeder not doing a very good job of feeding, which means we're binding up on something or not running hot enough. I mean, we seem to be putting a decent layer down. May simply be that we're just too close there, so it's having trouble extruding, because now it seems to be doing okay. So our leveling probably needs to be tweaked on that first layer. Watch this for a little while just to see what happens with the color change. You can see right now it's printing just orange. I'm actually not going to attempt to record the entire run here. I'm just going to record in segments, because editing it the last time was a pain in the butt. Of course, I haven't made any other changes as far as the settings, so we're still running with the defaults, which means that this raft is going to be a little tight on the base. But I don't really care about that. I just want to see if we can get multi-colors and get it to turn out. Whatever the default settings are in Cura, this is actually a pretty dense raft. I'm used to seeing it a little more open and airy, certainly in the first layers. The fan is running for my cooler, and it looks like it's at 50%, so... Notice the black streaking, which I don't know where that's coming from, because it shouldn't have been driving the black at all. Hopefully this is the last layer before we actually start printing our benchy. Yep, there we go. So certainly that looks really good on there, just as a initial print. You can see that. It really comes down to the bridging that occurs when it prints the next layer, as well as just being able to get this off of the base at this point. Well, we are now attempting to print black. I do believe that was the black layer that you were hearing clunk, 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 but I don't know for sure. Yeah, so here it's bridging across that text. And I realize my camera work's probably not very good here, but that's life. Interesting in that it's put another layer there, and I didn't see it do anything on the little side plate. Like I say, that is the black extruder attempting to extrude. Sorry, I'm shaking this. So, I fully expect this print to fail, and we're doing infill now. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here. Like I say, I don't expect this to work at all. Here we're homing again. Had to move the tape because I tore it up trying to get the part off. The partial part. Alright, so there we're printing our raft. You can see I'd been testing my extrusion, so we are currently doing black. Now we're transitioning to orange. It's a little disturbing we didn't get anything on that base where all of the changeover is going to occur. Hopefully that will still turn out good. Judging from the popping, we're still a little tight to the board, which is good because that means that as it prints this, we'll still get good adhesion. I think that was just a perimeter it was printing before. Alright, I'm going to stop the video because I don't see any reason to keep recording this. I'll catch some when we get a little further along. Well, so here's my first dual color benchy, although as you can see, it's not the correct two colors. It ended up being brown and black for most of it, simply because the size of this pad is not big enough. For whatever reason, whether or not it needs to do two colors, it prints a black layer and an orange layer, but it's not printing enough to actually switch through the entire time. So now I'm going to have to go back and change this to make a much larger pad so that it can transfer back and forth between black and orange completely. As you can see, it looks like it took a couple of layers of orange before it made the, got the thing completely clean. And so we'll talk a little bit about settings on the software here. But for the most part, what I had to do was make the retraction be 5 centimeters. I initially started at 2 or 2.5. That didn't work. I went to 3, still not enough. So I just kind of brute forced all the way back to 5, and that seemed to work. So coming into Cura, you can see here where I changed the retraction on extruder switch to 50. 20 square millimeters worth of surface area is not enough, and I don't think that doubling that's going to be enough. Could take that to 50, but I think I'm going to try a little more than that. Let's see if 3 times as much is enough. All right. Now, the other thing related to this retraction information is the fact that this is not a mixing tip. So we have to actually retract and get the filament out of the way. You see how there is only one small tube going down into the hot end. So only one filament from that block will fit into the hot end at one time. So it's necessary to pull the other one back far enough that it completely pulls the filament out of the hot end and then inserts the other. So every time it does a layer change, it has to do that, which of course slows the print down. And this is as opposed to, if you look, there are mixing heads that take 2 filaments into it and then mix at the tip. So what this means is this is not a head, although we ended up with brown simply because the head itself had a little bit of filament left over every time it switched. The reality is we cannot actually make a transition from one color to another that, where we went from orange to brown to black if we wanted to make one of these pretty multicolor transition prints. That's not possible with this head. So this really is the worst of all worlds. So we'll save this as a dual 50-60. Come back to the slicer, select that, and let Cura slice it again. And of course, we've got to get our bed clear before we can print anything. Okay, so here we go, homing, and we're going to try printing our multicolor again with a much bigger pad now. One other thing that I'll point out that bothers me about the printer layout, and I don't know if there's a coordinate system change, is simply that because home is at the back, X and Y are backwards. Now this is just backwards compared to my existing printer, may or may not be backwards compared to other printers, but certainly compared to the software it's backwards. So, seems like there should be a way to fix that, and we'll have to look into that. So that's interesting. So we've gone off the bed a little bit, and the part we're printing is now taller, and since it's not sticking to the aluminum, we'll have to, or it's not taller, it's wider. See if this will, nope, it's peeling up. I also need to add some encode to this thing, because when you kill it or you do anything, it just stays where it was. So at the end of a print, it just sits right on top of things. Alright, so here we go again. Hopefully I've got the tape in the right place this time. It turns out that because the landing pad is bigger, I ended up having to move the tape to be able to catch the whole thing. So the pad for the color change is considerably bigger, and it was hanging off the tape and not sticking to anything. So now we're waiting on temperature to stabilize. Since of course when I aborted the print, it turned the cooler off, or the heater off. It's early in the morning here. I need to be doing other things, but I'm sitting here screwing with this. Clean the junk off my tip. I don't really care about the border around the raft. Alright, hopefully I moved that tape far enough forward that my raft will stick. Oh, we're right at the edge. But I think we're safe. Interesting set of buzzing sounds for the feed there. For a second there, I was afraid we'd broken our black filament. It doesn't look like it's a problem. See there, it still seems to be going in. Orange seems to be feeding okay. Interesting, it didn't actually finish that part of the raft before it decided to come over and work on this one. Well, we'll let this go for a few layers and come back once it starts doing its color change on the stack up and confirm that each one of those layers is actually a different color. Otherwise I'll abort this and we'll make it bigger. Layers in, apparently our black retraction and whatever is jammed up in there, and it's not doing what it's supposed to do. So we aren't getting any black feed one way or the other. So now I get to try to fix that. Well, so I had to run the black all the way out because apparently that end was just fat enough that it was binding trying to move forward. It would retract, but it would not move forward. and I only got it to retract by actually pulling on it. So I'm still concerned that there may be something at the end of the feed there that's blocked up once I get back in there. Well, so I'm ready to call this thing a complete piece of crap. Totally worthless. We've got a nice solid clog. So after our first complete dual color print, one of the two feeds is clogged up somewhere in this cooling stage so that I can't feed any filament in. I don't know what it's going to take to try to disassemble this whole thing and get it off, but obviously this is not made to make that easy. And you know, all of my strapping up here to keep this thing stable is not going to be very good either. So, you know, these Bowden feeds are almost impossible to work with because you can't, unless the filament is perfectly straight and you manually put it in, which means that you've got to manage to push that plunger from across the printer, which is not easy to do. You get the filament in, and now we've got problems that our hot end is not going to feed correctly. So, like I say, it's not a mixing end. It's simply just not a viable solution at all. That retraction means that you're pulling back warm filament back into the cooling body, and if it happens to stick, you're pretty much screwed. So, and that's what appears to have happened, is that somewhere inside this cooler area, we now have the filament stuck to it. And so there's enough of a piece in there that the filament won't feed forward anymore. So now I get to disassemble this whole thing, and I'm not sure it's worth reassembling versus buying parts to do this the correct way. So I will probably go ahead and post this because at this point we're stalled. I would say if you're going to buy this printer, forget the Bowden and dual extruders. Just go with a direct drive and save yourself a lot of grief. Don't waste your time with the attempt to do dual extruders on this. By the way, in my original assembly video, I couldn't tell you for sure how much tube I had used here, but now that I have fed filament back and forth through it a couple of times, I can tell you it's right at 60 centimeters. Alright, so after another trip to Home Depot to get some carbon steel, basically piano wire, this is nice rigid wire that is just a little bit smaller than your 1.75 filament. So I got that to force, break loose whatever was jammed up inside this nozzle on the black side. So I've changed the Cura settings again, and I've gone to, I actually took it down to 35 millimeters of retraction instead of the 50 that I tried last time, just to try to keep the end from pulling out as far and hopefully not jamming up as much, because that is one of the causes is too long a retraction. So 35 appears to give enough clearance. And so here you see it doing a color change. And this, I believe, is a change to black. So you can see we're starting out in what is still not orange. And it changes to black pretty quick because black, the pigment's pretty strong. And so, now we're pushing out black filament. We still aren't printing anything black yet. And so now it's swapping, and now it's going back and printing orange. So this is what I would consider a defect, or at least a weakness in the Cura slicer for handling this transition. And so you can see it's starting to come out orange at about 50%, pretty much the same way it was before, but it's just because the black still tends to leave some color in there. This is not going to be an orange print. It's still going to be very brown looking for the amount of black pigment that's remaining in the head for too long. And so this is already taken up to 60 square millimeters over the, I think it started at 20. So quite a bit more area. And the problem is that this little landing pad that is used for the color transition, you know, remember, it doesn't have any infill or anything else. So it's building 2 layers for every layer it prints. And basically that little pad is going to have more plastic in it than this benchy will. Now, if this was a very large part, maybe that wouldn't matter. But for a part this size, that is a tremendous waste of filament to be able to get this part printed to color, especially given it's looking like crap. Now, the totally brown one I did earlier, my wife actually said, wow, you came up with a way to print wood grain. You know, that looks great as wood grain, because we had horizontal brown stripes of different darknesses depending on which layer. So, but that wasn't my intention. If I wanted to print wood grain, I probably couldn't do it. But in this case, you know, I really just want a freaking orange boat with some black trim. And we just aren't getting there. So this dual switching head just is not a viable solution. Now, I don't know if a different slicer might do a better job of the transitions, but I still think you're going to have a problem when you get to the layers that need it. But there are some things that can be done in the slicer. For example, there's absolutely no reason on these layers that don't need to change. This thing could just be printing infill. It doesn't need to, you know, it needs to build the stack. That's true. But it doesn't have to print the stack unless it needs to change colors. And so, you know, if you had a dual color thing going all the way up, yeah, that's going to take time. You're going to waste all that filament. But if you didn't, like this, it should be able to reduce that filament usage a lot. So, again, that's not a problem with the FT-6. That's just a weakness in the way the slicer is designed to handle this particular problem. So that's some feedback that maybe they can improve that. So even after doing a much larger transition stack there, I still end up with a brown benchy, a little more orange, but only marginally so, and a lot more garbage from the transition. I'm not sure if that's related to the amount that it retracted on each one or what. The one thing that I was seeing is that it does the first retraction for color change here, then moves over and does the extension. So it's actually potentially, you know, it sits there for quite a while it does a 3.5 centimeter retraction. So that's what we got. And of course this thing's not homing either. It does lift up a little bit off the stack, so the drip that it gets sits there. But it's kind of in the way, so I'm going to have to change the post code. Alright, so to print my 14 gram benchy, we have this big block of plastic that weighs 19 grams. So we're basically doing about 30% more material to be able to do just the color transition, and even then it didn't work. So this approach is just really useless, certainly for something this size. I mean, to get this to come out orange, we'd have to waste so much material in those color transitions that it's just not cost effective or anything else. This extruder is really just worthless. So this is really going to be my last attempt to do anything with it. If the colors were closer, if it wasn't black so it didn't leave so much pigment, it might work, but I'm just wasting my time, so I'm going to get something better. Okay, so I ran my first actual production print here. I had to switch to slicer rather than Cura because Cura will not support using just the second roll. I didn't want to have to switch this around and put the black in as the primary. And so in order to make that work, I had to use slicer. That's not a fault of the printer, that's a fault of Cura. Found people talking about this problem and complaining a little bit. Unfortunately, the amount of garbage on it like this right here, that's not usable. So, you know, this stuff will clean off okay, but since I've got customers actually wanting this, yeah, that's pretty crappy. Not sure how much of that is settings versus how much of that is this Bowden. But yeah, that's pretty horrible. I end up, you know, I'll get stranding on my Robo, but never this bad. And certainly not with all of the material on the surface where it's going to or from. Oh, so that's pretty disappointing. Alright, starting test number 2, and I didn't change anything other than the filament settings. I have traditionally run this filament at about 210 is what I needed to on my Robo 3D to get decent results. I've actually pushed this all the way down to 190, and it still seems to be extruding fine. So this is something I would, you know, again, haven't used enough different 3D printers, but it would be something that I kind of inherently expect out of the approach being used just in 3D printers in general, certainly the cheap ones, in that these thermistors are not in any way calibrated, and plus you've also got different thermal configurations with the hot ends themselves, and the relationship between the heat and the cold and the tip, or the heat and the sensor and the tip, I should say. So what I believe is part of the situation here, and we'll see if it bears out with a reduction in stringing, is that the temperature that's being reported for one printer versus another for the exact same filament are actually completely different, and so the filament reacts differently as well. And like I say, just watching these first layers being printed, I would say that that's already being held out. The first layers that I watched when I started the last print had a lot of things happening just as the head was sweeping back and forth across, where it didn't look right, if you will. So we'll see in another 5 or 6 hours. Actually, we'll see after work, since I have to actually go earn a living. But again, this is looking a lot cleaner already. So we will see this evening. Well, I'm this far into the print, and if the head will get out of the way here. Alright, there we go. I'm still getting the same sort of blobbing and stranding, even though I'm running basically 20C less. This still looks like crap. So I don't see any reason to bother finishing this print. We'll play with settings again. We'll also see if we can't get Cura to print either using the second extruder or just switch extruders. See if the slicer will make any difference. But this is very disappointing to today. And Frankly, it doesn't really matter because the thing was still stranding like a complete piece of junk. So the fact that it managed to pop off the stuff and become spaghetti is somewhat immaterial, other than just the complete waste of material. Now, to be fair, while I believe this is the same stuff I've been buying and have been perfectly happy with, this was a new roll from a separate order, so there could be something with this particular roll. But to find out, I'm going to go pull it off, put it on my Robo, and try to print this same thing there, and we'll see what happens. So by the way, a quick note on this. I made some changes, which included increasing the retraction from 2 to 3 millimeters. Didn't really expect that to make much difference. Dropping the temperature down now to 180, and it's still printing fine. So that, to me, really begs the question of what this temperature is running, unless there's something really, really off with this filament. And finally, I also added a 2 millimeter wipe. So it's supposed to be trying to wipe the tip and prevent a lot of this, but that doesn't seem to be doing anything either. Again, don't know what that means about the slicer versus the printer, but you know, obviously can't live with this. So we are starting that same print on our Robo. I just left the old glue on here, figured it was smooth enough in the middle that this would work fine. I'm running, I don't know how well this will show up showing it this way. Basically I'm running at the default 210 50C on the bed. This of course is done with matter control, the matter slicer. So we will see whether it's the filament or something with the printer, print head, Bowden, Repetier, you know, whatever the combination is. But we will see. Alright, so here is my finished print on my Robo 3D with this exact same black filament, and it performed exactly as expected. There's a little bit of spider web size strands, you know, the type of stuff that just brushes off. You know, not a problem at all. No real evidence of, you know, a couple of little spots on the surface where there's a little bit of excess. But, you know, a beautiful print. So the problem is not the filament. I really don't know what it is. Now, one comment on the spaghettification of the last print that I had tried. I think the reason that the part came off the bed was simply because I've been pushing the temperature so low that I didn't get very good adhesion. So when you look at the bottom of this, you can actually see pretty clearly the lines. I'm curious as I pop this one off of the glue. Yeah, looks pretty decent. Focus. So, all in all, yes. You know, this is what I expect out of my new printer, and obviously I'm not getting it. And just for comparison again, here we have Robo 3D on the left versus Folger Tech attempts on the right. And again, big waste of plastic for really bad looking parts. So I don't know if I can dial in with this extruder or not. One other comment, you'll notice up here I had added these LEDs to my Robo, which makes it really nice. I mean, even with the room dark, you can see what's going on, which of course works nice for the camera. I had planned on using the same camera to be able to monitor either printer and just pan back and forth, but what I realized this morning when I had left this printing is because the bed is high, I'm actually going to need a camera up top somewhere to be able to monitor this, and I can't tilt it down very far, so I'm actually going to have to hang the camera upside down. So I'm going to have to come up, buy a second camera specifically for this, and hang it from the rail system, which will of course make it bounce constantly with the printing. I had already ordered some 24-volt LEDs to put on this. Unfortunately, the eBay seller that I ordered from tried to do a bait and switch on me, so that order got canceled. I just haven't gotten around to doing another. Always the risk of eBay. So, like I say, getting perfect prints off of my old printer. The one thing I'd like to do, and we'll have to see if I can make that work, would be if I took the same G code and attempt to play it on this printer. What will I get? That would be a very interesting thing to find out. At this point, I'm going to see about putting this video together and get it posted, because I think people will be interested to see what I'm getting here.